education in this hybrid world, this new work world, is even more important.
So when it comes to user adoption and training, it's so much more critical now than it was before, even though people think that the opposite is the case.
And I'm not seeing any organizations really put proactive training in place for those managers to say, hey, there's a new skill set here.
And so the most important thing for me is that the leaders are enabled in this hybrid work environment to hear from, listen to, and get the information from their teams in a timely way.
Greetings and welcome to this fourth in a series of 5 IMCCA podcasts to wrap up 2023. I'm David Danto, representing the IMCCA today, and I'm with my fellow IMCCA board member, Rich Sasson.
This week's subject is the importance of education in a hybrid world. Are we giving managers enough training to manage the hybrid workforce? Are we giving employees enough training to work with the tools and platforms they have at their disposal now? Let's hear what IMCCA member firms and industry analysts have to say about it.
During the pandemic, we learned a couple of things. We learned that usage and adoption of technology has changed. At the beginning, we would have these long drawn-out programs, and that would be the proof of concept, that would be getting it installed, teaching some people how to use it. And I think during the pandemic, we actually did learn that ripping the Band-Aid off a little quicker kind of works. And so these long 2-year projects that we need are just not necessary anymore. But now there's that group in the middle. Those are the managers. Those, I think, might be struggling a little still. We need to make sure that the managers understand what are the differences of the types of employees we have, because we're all not clones anymore. We used to walk in with the same suit, the same tie, the same time, right? Work the same way, leave the same time. We're not like that anymore.
I think as far as training managers how to manage remotely, the most important thing that's missing is making sure that the managers actually trust their workers. Because if they don't trust that their workers are doing what they're supposed to be doing, then they can't get the productivity out of it. So a lot of times, it's out of sight, out of mind. And some managers feel that if they can't see what their workers are doing, that maybe the workers aren't making the most of their time and they're not doing what's needed. So if you can't trust your employees, then there's a real problem. And I think that's the big issue right now.
The importance of education generically will never go away. And I am a big fan of continuing education for everyone. There's an old adage of when you stop learning, you stop living, or you start dying, depending on how fatalistic you want to get. But when you start looking at your employees and you start promoting people from within and just kind of setting them loose and go, well, you've been great at X and now you're the manager of X. Well, then that's not really equipping them well. It's also not equipping the people that they are responsible for.
In terms of user experience, it used to be a bane of the industry. I think now that it's a lot easier, a lot more intuitive than it was before. And I think the technology's lent itself to that. In terms of, I do want to speak to the virtual leading of teams virtually. I think nothing new about leading teams virtually at all, ever. In fact, they've been teaching that in business school for a long time. I think that now, though, you were quite a long way up the chain before you were really learnt the skills of how to lead virtual teams. I mean, for you to be in the office, for you to be a leader and not have your people around you in the office, you were longer up the line. Today, that's not the case.
I think user adoption and training is really, really neglected at the moment. We went through that period in the pandemic where everyone was forced to get on with it. And yes, they got on with it. They found a way. Were they working optimally? Probably not, but we kind of got by and we made do. With the cloud in particular, all the technology is moving so fast now. There's so many new features. Obviously, I focus on Teams, but the same on the other platforms. There's feature after feature after feature. and users don't naturally adopt all those features in the best way. They don't even know what the best feature is to use. So I feel like businesses are investing in these cloud platforms that constantly give new capabilities, but they're not doing equivalent investment in user adoption and training to make sure they get the most of them. In terms of management in a hybrid world, there are some specific skills that are very different to managing a set of people in a single location. So some managers have managed hybrid teams obviously before. It's not a completely new concept, but there are plenty of managers that are moving from managing all or the majority of their team mostly in the office to a much more hybrid scenario. Even if they're geographically close, they're not in the office every day. And I'm not seeing any organizations really put proactive training in place for those managers to say, hey, there's a new skill set here.
The importance of education comes in two fronts. One is making the employee aware of what technologies are available for them to utilize, where they're utilized, and why they'd want to utilize them. And then two is making people feel comfortable using the technologies to get business accomplished. The old adage of if somebody's a good salesperson, we promote them to become a manager. And just because you're good at selling does not mean you can manage people. I think if there are certain skill sets that people need to manage effectively using these technologies, we need to teach them how to do that.
You know, more and more as we go forward in this new world of working, people are more aware of who they are, and organizations also need to be more aware of who they are. And then because the right person isn't the right fit for every specific opportunity or every specific organization. So if you're aware of who you are, it allows you to interview more effectively. It allows you to support your team better. It allows you to get better outcomes. And I think that at the end of the day is what we're all after.
You know, pre-pandemic, there's so much out there for training on management, you know, from best management practices, how to manage your teams, a Scrum. Oh my God, I was overwhelmed with the information that was hitting me on Scrum techniques or Scrum-like techniques. And if we're doing everything remotely, that affects all that. You know, we're gonna use the same basic principles. You have your team leader and the team leader assigns work and people do the work and it gets done. I mean, at the end of the day, but the dynamic definitely changes if you're doing a video Scrum than if you're doing a physical Scrum.
Managers, and especially middle management, often doesn't get training. Now, I do think progressive organizations are looking at this and saying we really do need to train our managers. Unfortunately, I think in many large organizations, the very senior people got specialized coaching, or people identified as, you know, up and comers. You know, sometimes they had some high performance programs, but the truth is it is more complicated to manage people when they're distributed.
One of the key aspects that companies need to be thinking about is how to educate your workforce or train your workforce to really thrive in a hybrid work world. I think the way that we have done that historically was to get everybody in a room and, you know, go through that you know, training example, and that's just not how people are going to be able to learn.
I think what we're talking about now are not the soft skills. I think what we're talking about now is a way to reevaluate how we judge remote workers, how we measure their performance, but also how we recognize how the fact that they are remote changes the way that we manage them. And so we have to adapt. I think it's, I don't think we do a good job of this. I think we're kind of doing it on the fly.
I come from the school of like servant leadership so much. I believe so much in that, you know, effective leadership as listening. And I think that is where, you know, hybrid work actually causes some friction, because if you're going to be a great listener, in the past, you'd be able to kind of walk the halls or have people just leave your door open and people would come and grab you. It's not like that anymore. You may be a very distant person to your team. I mean, if I think about my own team, they're spread across 3 continents. So it is very, very dispersed. And I think that that's a challenge for leadership, to be truly effective at listening and responding to what the teams are bringing to them.
First and foremost, I think it's not only educating the managers, but it is educating the employees as well, right? Your individual contributors and your managers, your leaders within that organization. I think there's a loss from the employers from the remote perspective. I think there's a loss for the employees on the mentoring and coaching capability of what they're missing out, particularly the people in the workforce from, day 1 to 5 years, where they're getting mentored every day. They're understanding how business 101 up to 501 is happening, if you will. And they're not understanding or getting educated by not being in the office.
But those types of things, that's how you learn about people, and you learn how to engage with them, and you learn how to reach them, right? As you start to see those pieces of each other. And I do think it's harder for us to do today than it was before. Technology is fantastic. There are things I couldn't do without technology, but there are things that I think technology has changed my personality in certain ways too, or little aspects of myself.
So these are things that most companies need to start to think about now, and some are doing that. I mean, you have companies that are saying, hey, mandating everybody go back to the office for a variety of reasons, right? And rightfully so. There are certain roles, there are certain things you can't teach over a meeting platform. You need to be in person.
So in terms of training managers, I think one of the things that, regarding that emotional chasm that I talked about, we need to have some training for managers on inclusivity, teaching them how to make sure, as it is, even in person, if you have somebody that's quiet and that's shy, you can kind of see from just looking at them how much engagement they have in the meeting. You can kind of get some social cues, visual cues that they probably want to say something, but they're just a little shy too. And so you make an opportunity for them to do that. But as soon as you start having now remote people a part of this meeting, you have to be just that much more conscious of, who is participating, who is engaged, making sure, like, for example, that those cameras are on so that we can see their face and get those social cues and draw people out and draw them into the conversation.
What does this kind of hybrid management look like? Well, management can also be supplemented and complemented by artificial intelligence, by understanding more about the people that you're managing, knowing how and where their productivity peaks and valleys, and where their productivity peaks and valleys. I mean, maybe you do have people that work better in the office, work better at home. So don't just give me a graph of numbers and charts and tables, but actually tell me that, hey, my employee in Chicago works best on these days in this weather, in this location, so that I can optimize his or her productivity output and hopefully happiness and satisfaction at the job during these certain times of the day.
From the end user perspective, we do need more training, especially as the rate of new features and new capabilities come out. We've seen recently announcements from really every vendor in the meeting and collaboration UC space of AI generation capabilities, of features for things like events and note taking and storage, creation of informal communities and so on. So I think people are kind of in this overload. So I think training is going to be more critical than ever before. And our research shows that the majority of companies do invest in end user training, whether it's informal or whether they actually bring trainers in or purchase training software from a number of companies that are out there. On the manager side, there was a big challenge for managers who are used to being able to walk around and get people into the meetings and check in on people to be able to do that in the new environment. And I think that there's a continued need for people to understand best practices, to be able to manage based on, some people may feel very lonely at home and need constant contact, constant catch-ups. Other people are, tell me what I need to do and leave me alone and let me do it. So, learning that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work.
That's it for this week's 2023 Wrap Podcast.
Join us next week when our topic will be the importance of meeting equity.